Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Yeti's Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Jimmy Gaspero, and I'm super excited about today's guest because I've read quite a few comic books that they've written, and they have written a lot of comic books for DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, Top Cow, Dynamite, Image, Devil's Due, CrossGen, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But please welcome to the podcast, Ron Marz. Ron, how are you doing today?
I am well, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
So I am very excited to talk to you. I've gotten in your line a few times to get some things signed at Baltimore Comic-Con. My brother and I go there every year. I love Baltimore, and I know that you've been going there. I think you've been there every year that I've been going.
Maybe not every year, but pretty close. I mean, it's a comic show. That's where our tribe gathers. Mark Nathan, who runs Baltimore, is a friend, and he's said for years, if you don't like comics, there's no reason to be in the building. This is a old school comic show. It just happens to be a really big old school comic show.
Yeah, my brother and I have been going, I think, since I think the first year we went was maybe 2016 or 17. So the past, 7 or 8 years. I love it. I have met so many different creators there, whether or not, they're in kind of like the main section or the folks in Artist Alley. I just really think they do a great job catering to, comic creators and to fans of comic books, which is, exciting. Some places, don't really are geared towards media guests. I think they do a really nice job. So,
well, a lot of those, and I don't begrudge those shows, what they are and what, how they bring in, their guests. To me, it's kind of like buyer beware at this point. If you go to a show and the first 60 guests are all media people or all celebrities, and then there's like 4 comic people at the bottom, it's not a comic show. It's a pop culture show, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sort of know what you're getting. Don't go there and then bitch about, well, there were no comics. Well, they were kind of telling you there were no comics.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with those types of pop culture, shows. I agree, but like I like the comics nature of Baltimore, so I really enjoy going there. I mean, I've followed your work, followed you on social media, seen in recent years the different shows that you go to. How has like the convention scene for you changed over the course of your career?
Well, I mean,
if it has.
Oh, sure it has. Absolutely. Now conventions are obviously a huge business. There are, multinational corporations, investing in comic book conventions and turning huge money doing them, which is great. The rest of the world has sort of discovered our little fiefdom and realized they could make some money off of it. And now everybody's in. But, I think the first show I went to was in a high school gymnasium, and, and it was a bunch of nerds. It was a bunch of nerds, and I think there were like 2 women in the entire building. So to me, that's the biggest change. Now conventions are for everybody. Now you walk through a convention and it's, probably 50-50 or maybe even 60-40 women to men. It's the industry as a whole, comics being part of it, but also just, regular media, had discovered, there's, like everybody wants to read these things. Everybody's into this stuff. So, which I think is the best part of it completely. When I broke in, it was 1990. I broke in as like a 22-year-old kid or something like that. And conventions, there were a handful of conventions in the country. San Diego was the big one. They were mostly hotel ballroom shows, and there weren't that many of them. But now, now there's a show of pretty decent size, in every region of the country, every weekend of the year, except maybe Christmas. And now it's international. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to get to, a laundry list of countries as long as your arm. New Zealand, Uruguay, South Africa, Malta, India, all over Europe.
Oh, wow.
It's the fact that I get to go to these places, that I get to, fly to literally the other end of the earth, New Zealand, South Africa, because I write comics is insane. The fact that I went to Nairobi, Kenya to a comic book convention is just nuts. But that's the rest of the world catching up to us.
What is that experience like? I mean, not just that it's crazy that you say you write comic books and you get to go to these places, but are there things that stand out about the culture of comic book fans in other countries that surprises you? Or is a nerd a nerd?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the surprising thing, right? Like a nerd in Nairobi, Kenya is like the same dude in Des Moines, Iowa. They love the same thing. Somebody in India or Mexico or Heartland America, we're all kind of we're all the same tribe, and you get a lot of the experiences are the same. At an international show, they're just a little more thrilled that you're there because they don't do this kind of thing very often. This is new to the audience, and they're really happy that somebody came from half a planet away to come commune with them, to come do this thing.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that strikes me the most is for the vast majority are lovely people, and we're all the same. We're all the same. We're all there for the same reasons, because we love this stuff and we love this form of storytelling. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. I have the same conversations in New Zealand or Africa that I do at San Diego.
Yeah.
Probably, honestly, even, like more comic specific in far-flung places than you do get in San Diego, because that's obviously a big media show now. So,
yeah.
So it's I'm forever thankful that I've been able to get to all the places that I've visited. Somebody flies you out and puts you up, and you get to, then you get to go on safari the next day. It's, you get to go into the bush and look at animals. It's
wow.
The most amazing thing ever.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know if, like, when you think of like what when you mention your name to the comic book fan, I immediately think of Green Lantern, but Silver Surfer, all the different things that you've done. Do you notice, like, I'm just kind of curious now about that comic culture in other places. Do you notice that, like, outside of the U.S., is there one thing that you think folks come up to you more about, or want you to sign or to talk about, or is it just generally you get a mix of everything?
It's a mix, but Batman's pretty popular no matter where you go.
Yeah. Okay.
Mexico City, Batman's the thing, right? It's so Batman is sort of the universal, and then
Right.
everything else is a lot of it depends on what has been available for distribution in places.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's a different answer in different places. Sometimes it's places have gotten my Green Lantern run and have no idea what Silver Surfer is,
Okay.
or Witchblade has landed there, and the Marvel and DC stuff not so much. So it's it's a different kettle of fish. But since digital became more prevalent, I think there's less of those blind spots in places, because everybody can access what you're doing digitally.
Mm-hmm. Um, I made a joke before we started recording about I just wanted to talk about H.E.A.T for like 45 minutes. So for listeners that don't know, I think H.E.A.T, what was it, the Hal's Emerald? I think it was like a TAC team, and then I think they changed it to Advanced Team at some point.
Yeah, they realized that attack was not maybe the
best word,
the best method of delivering their message. So they changed it to advancement.
Whenever, I was pretty active on Twitter, and now I've kind of in just like a lot of folks in the past year or two of migrated over to like Blue Sky and some other places. But whenever there's a conversation on social media about a creator getting hate, or they're being treated derogatory for the direction they're taking a character for something they've written, I think about you all the time, because I think of, it seems a lot easier to give creators crap. Like we've never had, as a fan, we've never had the ability to be so connected to the people making the stuff that we love. Like I'm a personal injury attorney in Wilmington, Delaware, and I just love this stuff. And like I said, my episode of the podcast that came out today was like my 160th. Like 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able, without social media, to kind of like, do that and put this together. I always think, like, with social media, when you have such ability to reach the folks making the stuff that you love, like, why spend so much time being like angry about it? But whenever that does happen, I often think about you and like, man, they like 1996, like they really had to go out their way to give you crap about your Green Lantern run.
You had to earn it. You had to go buy a stamp and put an envelope in the mail.
They had to write like a real letter.
And they did. I mean, we got plenty of mail, and we got death threats, and
my gosh.
The lesson here is, if you're gonna send death threats to DC Comics for the Green Lantern team, don't put your return address on the envelope.
Yeah, that's a bad idea.
That was it. Yeah, that turned out to be a bad idea. The NYPD went to visit a few people and have a conversation with them.
Do you think, does that ever cross like your mind again at all? Like, does that ever, did it ever bother you back then? And is it ever anything that ever you think about now that you had to go, through and deal with that, and folks wanted to have you fired because the direction you took a story in? I mean, or editorial told you to take a story in a certain direction?
It didn't bother me then, doesn't bother me now. I just kind of feel like it goes with the territory. It shouldn't, but it does. That's to a great extent, that's the bargain you make when you do this stuff. And if you don't like that bargain, you should probably do something else, because there's really no way to stop it. I had, like I said, I broke into Marvel at like 22 or something like that. And prior to that, I had worked at a daily newspaper in my hometown, and while I was in college. So I got the people don't like what you do part of my education out of the way when I was like 19. Like, it didn't matter what you wrote. I was a sports reporter, and then I was the entertainment editor, and so it didn't matter if you, like, I would cover a high school football game, and the next day you would get calls at the office that people were pissed off that you didn't have little Johnny's name in the story. And it was mostly because little Johnny rode the bench for 3 quarters and then got in at garbage time. But so I had an education very quickly from seasoned journalists that, look, no matter what you write, somebody's going to be pissed off, and they're the ones you're going to hear from, not the people that were happy with what you did. So I had that drilled into my head before I could buy a legal drink. So that was great training to have coming into comics, because I already I already knew that stuff. And I think a lot of people come into comics and are not prepared for that because, real life, being out in the world where people are generally polite to you, does not prepare you for that. But I learned those lessons. So when, early in my career, and then when the, Green Lantern stuff went down, it was kind of like, all right, well, sorry. It's impossible to please everybody. And ultimately you have to do this job for yourself. You can't go into it with the mindset of, I'm going to please everyone that reads this. I want to bask in their adulation. That's not how this job works. And it's not how you should expect it to work. So you have to tell the best story that you can, and the story that entertains you the most, you being your first audience. And as long as you're happy with what you did, the rest of it, you can sort of let it roll off your back. But I think a lot of people don't come into it with that mindset, and it's a tough lesson to learn. And look, people are sensitive, and it's understandable. And particularly, women, people of color, anybody who's not a straight white dude, gets an unholy amount of grief poured on them in social media, because that's unfortunately that's the society we live in. I would say we were a much more polite society when, if you ran your mouth to somebody, you had a fair chance of getting punched in the face. And social media, there are no consequences.
Right.
That stuff doesn't, there are people whose whole reason for being on social media is to make somebody unhappy. And I think a lot of that comes from unhappy people wanting to make other people unhappy, which, that's a whole other conversation. But I just think, unfortunately, it's reality that you have to figure out how you deal with it, because I don't think there's a way to make it stop.
Right. And it seems to me like the con experience, like a convention experience, when you're actually in person with people, there's not a line of people giving you crap. Like everybody seems to, I've been in your line before. Everybody there is, and a place like Baltimore, I've never had an issue. Everyone's polite. Everyone's excited to talk about comics. Like that's, without that anonymity sometimes of
right.
Of
Nobody.
media.
Yeah. There's very little. There's very little unpleasantness that goes on in person, because that's, people know better. For a myriad of reasons, people know better. But but online, where there are no ramifications for your poor behavior, it just, it's going to keep happening. And I think it's also easier for someone who wants to dish out abuse to do it online, because we don't seem like real people online either, right? We're just a screen icon and a name, and it's, I think there's a sense of disconnect that this is real people. I mean, one of the H.E.A.T dudes years ago, I was at a convention in Portland, Oregon, and this guy came up and was pointed out to me as, that's one of the, ringleaders from H.E.A.T, and he's really unhappy with you, and you should keep an eye on him. And, it was a, chubby little bearded dude who looked like Santa Claus. It was like, oh, okay, that's the guy. And he finally came up and, said he wasn't happy with me and gave me my H.E.A.T membership card, which was laminated, like and it had it had H.E.A.T's goals on the back of, and like the first one was "Fire my ass from the book," and make sure that I can't work in comics anymore. And I thought, it's like that Groucho line. Any club that would have me as a member, member, I wouldn't want to join.
Yeah.
So I was just like, well, thanks, but I don't really need this. And I did say to the guy, and we ended up talking, and not like we became fast friends or anything, but we ended up talking, and I said, he said to me that he was really unhappy with what I did to Hal Jordan, and Hal Jordan didn't deserve that, and that
Right.
and I said, Hal Jordan's not a real person. Like, he's a made up person, and you are more invested in the fate of a made up person than you are in me feeding my family through this job that I do.
Right.
And he sort of took a step back and looked around, and like, that had obviously never occurred to him. Like, that, this is a real person who, literally, pays his mortgage doing this.
Yeah.
So, it was a, education for me also, in that, you realize, oh, these, like, their imaginary friends, Hal Jordan and Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent, are more real to them than the people who actually make the books, which is understandable from a certain point of view, which, like, you sort of get, because they live with those people every day, and they don't know us. They don't know the creators at all as people.
Yeah.
And then the guy asked me to sign his books and went on his merry way.
I like how he still asked you to sign. He still asked you to sign his books.
Yeah. Put a pile down in front of me, and when I tell this story, sometimes I tell a fib and say that I signed the books. Yours truly, Rob Liefeld. But that would that's kind of a dick move, so I didn't do that. I just signed my name and wished him well.
What was it? The Emerald Twilight run?
Oh yeah, it was like the first year of my run, plus a Hal Jordan Parallax figure mint on card, which was a little odd to me, but okay, whatever, dude.
That's so funny. What's so bizarre? Wow. Well, sticking with kind of like Green Lantern and that run, and Kyle Rayner coming out of that. When you kind of have the ability to like co-create, create those types of characters that are still around, do you ever, and I know you've written some, done some recent Green Lantern stuff too. I think during Jeremy Adams' run, I know, like number 8, and I think a couple others you'd written some stuff on. But do you ever like keep tabs on a character like that, or is it just for you like it's an assignment? This is what I did. We got to co-create Kyle Rayner. We got to start him off. We got to do all of that. And if DC calls and wants me to jump back in, I'll catch up on what's been going on. But do you ever keep tabs on like anything like that?
I don't really keep tabs. More from the standpoint, I just don't have time. Like, I don't have time to sit down and read a stack of books every month. That's one of the dirty secrets of becoming a comic professional, is you don't really have a lot of time to read comics anymore. There's you try to keep up as best you can, but there's a stack of comics on my desk here that I'll get to at some point. But reading, usually the pull is to do the writing instead of the reading. In the case of Kyle, I don't, it's like watching somebody else raise your kids to a certain extent, which you get, which is how that works. You understand that process when you go into it. Like you come in and create a character for Marvel or DC, they ultimately belong to Marvel and DC. It's not yours. And you have to know that. You have to embrace that going into the thing, or it just. I know there are some creators who always who are always commenting on what happens to characters they created, and I don't agree with this. And look, man, there's no answer for that. There's no it's not yours. You knew that when you went in, and it's, I don't think, really healthy to obsess over what happens to your character once you're gone. So I sort of, I keep track to a certain extent, but, it's not like I'm reading it every month and, whatever. Look, I got to do my thing, and, both with the characters that I created and with characters that somebody else created. I got my ride on the merry-go-round with Green Lantern, and now it's somebody else's turn. And that's just, that's the nature of comics. That's the, you can't get too close. Once you're off the book, you can't get too close to the stuff because you don't get a vote anymore. You get a vote while you're working on the stuff, and then once somebody else is doing the job, keep your mouth shut.
You mentioned something earlier in terms of you as the writer are like your first audience and writing for yourself in terms of entertaining yourself. As you've gone throughout your career and the place you are at your career now, have you found that the types of stories you like to tell, how have they changed going from when you were first trying to break in and getting in work for the big two to, more recent stuff you've done now, like Beasts of the Black Hand that you've done with like Paul Harding, and I think Matthew Dow Smith did the art.
I don't really find it very different. I mean, it's all the same. It's all the same job. And frankly, it's the same job whether you're working on your own creator-owned stuff or you're working on Marvel and DC characters that have been around for 70 years. It's all the same job, which is telling a story that has, to me, it's telling a character-driven story that has some emotional weight to it and has some and is going to provoke an emotional reaction. Because ultimately, if you don't care what happens to the characters, why are you there? So I try to tell a story that I want to read, and you hope the audience comes along for the ride. Because I'm the only audience whose tastes I'm sure of. I don't know what Logan 517 in Arizona wants out of a story. Everything is anecdotal. The feedback you get, social media reviews, whatever, it's all anecdotal and it's all one person's opinion. So the only person's opinion that I trust is mine, because I'm sure of what I like and what I don't like and why I like those things or don't like those things. So my, from day one, my thought was always to tell the story I want to tell within the parameters that are given to me by the editor, the publisher, who's ever hiring me, if it's a work for hire job. If it's not a work for hire job, I do whatever the hell I want. And when it's work for hire, you're usually given some sort of parameters. Well, we need this to happen. Or you pitch, there aren't parameters, and you pitch the editor on what you want to do and where you want to take the story and the characters, and they say okay or not, and you come to some sort of consensus as to where you're going, and then you sit down and tell that story. And it's not, I've never been one to, outline everything and then stick to that outline 100%. And, part of this job is just sort of following the characters where they want to lead you. Sometimes they take you places that you didn't expect, and that's kind of great. That's like somebody else is doing the work. You're just along for the ride.
Do you think that mentality is what has, kind of propelled your longevity in comic books?
Oh shit, I don't know. I mean, I don't think about it. Because I've never had, I've never had much of a plan. Just like whatever looks good, whatever seems like it's going to be fun. I'm fairly certain comics are supposed to be fun. So that's always like, what would be cool? What would be fun? But I've never like, I need to, within 5 years, I need to be writing Batman. And within 10 years, I need to do a, universe changing crossover. And like, I've never set those sort of goals, because that, I don't know, just seems a little crass to me to, be more worried about I think you should be more worried about the stories you're telling than the career you're building. Which is probably dumb. I go, there are people who are much more, career centric and brand centric and all of that stuff. But to me, the stories have always been more important to me than I've turned down jobs that are higher profile for something that seemed like it would be a more interesting story. That's just how I'm wired. I'm not saying everybody needs to be wired that way, but that's what works for me, and it's worked for more than 30 years. So I'm not going to change now.
Mm-hmm. When now I know that I think you're still doing teaching like online like writing classes.
Yeah, I do some stuff for the J. Kruger studio out of New York City, out of Manhattan, and I do fairly regular teaching for United Arab Emirates for the Sandstorm comic and print. So,
okay.
So yeah, whatever little bits of knowledge I picked up, I try to pass along in those classes.
Not to spoil the class, but is there anything that you found resonates the most with people that have like taken your writing class in terms of like if there's one lesson that you pass on? Is it to focus on story or character? Is there something more fundamental?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of slices to that pie, and so there's a lot of stuff that I try to impart. But I think to me the two big things are comics are frozen moments in time, which is the first thing that Jim Starlin told me when he taught me how to do this. Like these panels don't move, man. You still see scripts turned in where it's like, Batman does this thing and this thing and this thing in this panel. And then in panel 2, he does these other, no, he doesn't. He does those 3 things in 3 separate panels. And this is a hard way to tell a story. Like if you can't think in pictures, you can't do this job.
Yeah.
And particularly people that learn screenwriting first and come to comics, it's a tough transition because comics are about the still image, and it's about figuring out what the best image to convey the story is, and then you move to the next image and the next and the next, and it's all funneled. And the other thing that I try to teach everybody that I work with is that it's if you're a writer, you are one half of the collaboration. There's no comic without the artist, and the artist is not your art monkey or your Xerox machine or your mind reader that's going to just take the thing that's in your mind and put it on the page. The artist is your co-creator and collaborator, and you have to let them do that job. You can't say, well, that's not how I saw it in my head. Well, if you're so determined that that's what that's got to look like, maybe you should draw it your own damn self. And inevitably people go, well, I can't draw. There's your answer. If you can't draw it,
that is a problem.
If you can't draw it, you're going to collaborate. So those are really the two. Those are really the two things that I think are most important. Is that the structure of writing a comic script is probably the hardest kind of creative writing you can do, because you have to learn so many skills and juggle so many balls doing that. And then, you have to be very accepting of being a collaborator to the art team and making them a full partner rather than just the next person in the assembly line. That's how you get a good comic, is that you're collaborating with everybody on the team, and they're all doing the thing that they do better than you can do it. And that's where that magic comes from. That's where the alchemy comes from. So, I mean, when I actually started doing these classes, I had to sit down and figure out like why I did the things that I did, like in approaching a comic and how you put the script together and how you deal with the real estate of a page and all that. Like I just did that naturally. Both from, I guess I have a fairly visual imagination. And also from what Jim Starlin taught me way back when, like I did that stuff, that's by second nature. And then when you have to actually convey that to somebody else, you have to sit down and think about, well, why do I do that? And how do I know how to do that? And so it was instructive for me to sit down and go, oh, that's why I do those things. Like it's, to a certain extent, it's like Ted Williams trying to teach hitting to people who are not Ted Williams. And I'm not comparing myself to Ted Williams by any means, but it's like, if you're gifted at doing something, or not even gifted, just you're used to doing something, it's kind of harder to teach it to somebody else who is coming into it fresh, who's coming into it without having done it for years. So I really had to sit down and go, okay, now how do I take what I do by instinct and teach that to people in steps? So I've actually really enjoyed the process. It's kind of cool, and people that I have taught classes to in either place now have their own comics out, which is really kind of cool. It's cool to have.
That's awesome.
It's cool to have somebody that you taught how to do this send you their comic.
That is awesome. Did you ever sit down and look at something you had done before to like use as an example and go, I don't know why I did this. I gotta find another page.
Maybe to a certain extent, but I hardly ever go back and look at what I've done anyway. Like it's
okay.
The best story you do should be the next story you do, and it doesn't work that way all the time. But that's the goal. But I did, like one of the scripts that I use in the class to show people this is what a beat sheet looks like, and this is what a script looks like, and this is what the comic looks like, is my script for Almost American 1, which Almost American issue 1, which was a series I did for Aftershock, which is basically the real life story of two Russian intelligence operatives, basically Russian spies who fled Russia and ended up in the United States and defected here. So like that was, to me, that was sort of half journalism and half comic writing, because I was trying to translate actual events, real people, real places into a comic script. So that's one of the ones I use, because it's all there, and it's all there with, this is what the U.S. Embassy looks like. This is what, this is the kind of plane they flew on. But, so it's, to me, that was an easier script to pass along to people, because you didn't need to know anything ahead of time. If I give them a Green Lantern script, there's a certain amount of knowledge you have to know coming into a superhero book. And this is especially like teaching in the Emirates, there's not much penetration of superhero comics. There's superhero media, but the actual comics themselves are, there's like one comic store in the whole country in Dubai.
Oh, wow.
So you can't assume. You can't assume that, like, if you did it here, everybody knows who Batman is. They know who Batman is there, but they might not know the comic version of Batman.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I would think that, just thinking about you saying that what came to you naturally, I didn't think about that. I always thought like, oh, somebody learned it, and then they're taking the skills that they learned and teaching it. But yeah, if you come by something naturally, to then have to go back and like break it down as to why you did it and like put it in a lesson plan to pass it on to somebody else, that is kind of fascinating to think about having to do that. But
yeah, you sort of I had to deconstruct what I do to be able to build it back into a framework. And again, and a lot of it was, I was just fortunate enough that I do have a visual imagination, and I can see stuff in my head. Mm-hmm. And frankly, it wasn't until a few years ago that I learned that not everybody can do that. Like I just assumed everybody could do that because I could do it. I could do it from when I was a kid. But
right.
I read a few articles about visual imagination and the fact that when someone says apple, I picture an actual specific apple in my mind. And when someone says apple to a different person, that person might see like a cartoon apple because that's how their brain is tuned. or a different person might see an outline of an apple because that's how their brain is tuned, or they might not see an apple at all because that's not how they're wired. And I was shocked to discover this.
Yeah, I think I saw the same thing, and I was just like, what?
Yeah, because I was just like, wait a minute, everybody can't do the thing that I just,
Yeah.
So it's, I'm very fortunate that's the way I was wired. And it's, it's probably to a certain extent, a chicken and egg question is, was I drawn to comics because I was wired that way? Or was the fact that I was wired that way pointed me towards comics? I could better I was better at getting comics when I was a kid, better at, understanding them, and understanding the visual aspect of them chiefly because that's the way I was wired. And I don't know what the answer is. It's probably some of each.
Yeah, probably a little of both. I read that same thing though and was kind of, blown away by it. That not just, the same thing where I had heard some folks don't have like an inner voice, and I'd read that and I just like couldn't wrap my mind around it. Like, it's just the brains are weird.
Yeah, well, obviously we only get one. So, and
yeah,
and some of us not even that. So,
well,
but the fact that like we can't see outside our own experience.
Yeah.
So it doesn't occur to us that there is a different experience than we can see. So that article just reordered my brain in a serious way.
Yeah. So what kind of what type of stories are you working on now, or that you still want to tell?
All of them. Like I've never been sort of genre specific, or because there are writers that come into comics and they just want to do superheroes, or they just want to do horror, or they and that's not like, I've never been sort of so genre specific that I didn't want to play with all the other toys in the toy box too. So, which then goes, I remember, years ago, Sean Murphy and I had a discussion of, branding, like branding yourself as a creator. And I was like, that's dumb. I don't want to brand myself. And he's like, no, that's smart, because then you attract an audience that's looking for that specific thing. And I think Sean's probably right. He's obviously been very successful. I mean, he draws pretty well too. That's probably got something to do with it.
That helps.
But he was aware of that sensibility of you need to brand yourself. And I just wasn't interested, because I wanted to write superhero stuff and horror stuff and science fiction stuff and historical adventure and whatever else I could get my hands on. Just because they were all flavors on the smorgasbord that I wanted to try. And I still feel that way. I mean, there's certainly stuff that I like to do more than others, but I probably don't want to tell, to great extent, funny animal stories or teen romance stories. That's not really of interest. But I mean, I did a bunch of Skylanders comics when I was working on the video games, which are basically funny animal stories. So, and I had a ball doing it. So, I just want to do, I want to do all of the stuff. I want to play with all the toys. So, I'll continue to do superheroes, because that's, like most creators, that's the most of what I've done, because that's where you can actually make a living doing these things. But, historical adventure, and, I've got 3 or 4 different creator-owned series getting worked on, and they're all different things. There's, there's espionage, there's sort of historical fantasy, there's a Western. So it's all,
I love Westerns.
It's all different stuff. And then the work for hire stuff is, whatever comes along and looks interesting. And, so there's some more stuff for Savage Sword of Conan, and which to me is that's what Savage Sword of Conan is the thing that I kept, that I still read when I decided I was too old to read comics. at the ripe old age of 14 or whatever I was. But I continued to read Savage Sword because, there were naked women in it. And plus monsters that needed killing.
Yeah.
So, the fact that I've been able to come full circle from when I was 14 reading Savage Sword every month to actually having stories in Savage Sword of Conan,
Yeah.
pretty cool. So that's all fun. And then I still work at Blizzard on the Diablo franchise, and that's it's still visual storytelling. It's a different kind of storytelling, but it's all, it's different, but it's the same. It's the same in that you're telling stories about characters and trying to evoke an emotional response from the audience. But you're also, I do comics, and it's me and 5 other people. And we make the thing, and then we make the next one. A month later we make another one. For video games, it's me and 600 people, all pulling on the oars in the same direction, and somehow everybody does a different thing, and at the end of 4 or 5 years we wind up with this $1 billion video game.
Wow. I wanted to ask for listeners who, if there is anybody who listens to the podcast who, let's say, hasn't read a Ron Marz comic, something that you've written, is there like one or 2 things? Yeah, I'll give you a top 3 of here's the top 3 Ron Marz comics that Ron Marz thinks you should read if you haven't.
Man, I don't know. I always feel like that's not my decision to make. It's the audience's decision.
Sure.
And to me, the caveat is there's the creator-owned stuff, and then there's the company-owned stuff, because those are 2 different approaches to a certain extent. But I'm very honestly pretty happy with most of what I've done. There's not much I look back on except for my run on Thor and go, yeah, it didn't work out like it was supposed to. Generally pretty happy because I was able to work with and still am working with some great collaborators. You're only as honestly as a writer in this business, you are only as good as the person drawing the story. If I write a great script and I hand it to a lousy artist, and frankly, that does not happen very often, if at all. At the end of the day, it's a pretty lousy story. It's just, it doesn't work because the match isn't right. And if I write a fairly mediocre script and they hand it to a really good artist, that's probably a pretty good story at the end of the day, because the artist elevates the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So if I have to pick one thing, it's one that's not even in print anymore. It was a book I did at Dark Horse called Samurai Heaven and Earth, which is a historical adventure, shockingly starring a samurai.
Good title then.
Yeah. And it's actually not in print anymore from Dark Horse, although I'm sure there are 2 collections of it that I'm sure on eBay or probably still on Amazon. And it's a samurai historical adventure that ultimately involves a samurai ending up in the court of Louis XIV with the 3 Musketeers.
Oh, that sounds
and
exciting.
That's probably my favorite thing, because it's exactly what I wanted it to be. It's a creator-owned thing, and I worked with Luke Ross on it, and just every page is absolutely gorgeous. We shot from loose pencils because there was no sense in inking them because it couldn't possibly get better. So that's, of anything I've ever done, that's my favorite thing. But, I think I've written 1,500 or 2,000 comics or something like that. So,
yeah.
There's probably something out there for you.
Without a doubt. I I certainly have things I will put in the show notes for listeners to check out. But I was just curious from you, yourself, what it might be. But now I'm gonna have to go try. I've never read that, so I'm gonna have to go try and see if I can't track down Samurai Heaven and Earth.
Samurai Heaven and Earth, 2
Nice.
volumes, and we started on a 3rd volume. Actually, the first issue got written. Luke did 5 covers, and then a lot of stuff changed at Dark Horse. We never got to finish it, and someday we still intend. I know what story is.
Yeah.
Like I said, the first issue's written. It's just a matter of Luke and I sort of figuring out our schedules and then figuring out where we want to do it. But I definitely want to. That's one of those bucket list things where it's like, oh yeah, we gotta finish that story. We gotta put all those characters to bed, because right now they're wandering. Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but they're wandering in the desert. So.
Okay. Are there other bucket list things? I mean, 1,500 to 2,000 comic books. Is there a character, not in terms of the type of story or a story you want to tell? I mean, is there a character that exists out there that, in terms of like somebody else's IP or some other story that you still, want to be able to leave your mark on one day? Is there some elusive character out there?
I've been very fortunate in that I've gotten to write virtually every character that means something to me.
Yeah.
At least once somewhere. I got to write John Carter and Tarzan and Conan and, most everybody in the Marvel and DC universes, Star Wars. So there's very little that I haven't at least been able to scratch the itch. I would like to do a Star Trek story, like an original Star Trek story at some point, to cross that off the bucket list. And the other answer I give to this question is probably one that's not going to happen, but I've always loved Dr. Fate. And Dr. Fate is awesome, but nobody's going to buy a Dr. Fate monthly series. So I've gotten to write that character a couple of times in the background of panels, but other than that,
yeah.
And then
Dr. Fate's had his own series a few times, right?
Yeah, but it never lasts. I mean, it's to a great extent. It's even less sales worthy than Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange never supports his own series for very long, even though creators are we're all falling over each other to get to do Doctor Strange because it's just one of the coolest concepts. But in terms of keeping a monthly series going, it's certainly not Batman or Spider-Man.
Well, I think one of those times I was at Baltimore, I think I got you. I think you wrote it to sign my copy of Doctor StrangeFate.
Yeah, that's honestly one of my favorite things. I mean, if you can't find Samurai Heaven and Earth, you could do worse than find Doctor StrangeFate, because Jose Luis Garcia Lopez and Kevin Nolan plus Matt Hollingsworth on the colors. That's one of my favorite issues ever because of the people I worked with. So it was also just a crazy fun concept to smush together the Marvel and DC characters, which I still sort of scratch my head and wonder like how we actually got away with that. But different era, obviously, when most of these characters were just comic book characters.
Yeah.
They weren't
they
weren't media icons.
This. Right. I mean, Dark Claw and Super Soldier and.
Yeah, I mean it's nuts. I think the Amalgam Omnibus will be out next month from Marvel, and DC handled it editorially.
Okay,
but I contributed I think the foreword and a bunch of essays that are in it and a bunch of stuff that was in my files left over from that era is in the back of the book. So there's about 200 pages of extras in the back of that omnibus, and some StrangeFate designs and a lot of stuff dating from that era that I thought would never see print again. But we packed as much of it into the omnibus as we could.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love all of those. I mean, I think that was all just a lot of fun. I mean, and they were good. I liked them. Thought they were good stories.
Yeah, it
And I
was,
liked the art.
again, it was an era in which Marvel and DC needed each other, for sales, to keep stores open and all that. So the level of detente, and the fact that both publishers were still in New York at that point, not 20 blocks from each other. And everybody at Marvel and DC knew each other. The staffs knew each other, played softball against each other, went to the same bars. So it was a different era than we have now, certainly. The corporate parents were not as overbearing in those days, because these were not, multimedia platforms that were worth billions of dollars. They were just comics.
Yeah. Well, I would be nice to see if you, to get your Doctor, your Doctor Fate comic one day. Maybe maybe it'd be ripe for a DC Black Label Doctor Fate story.
Yeah, the Black Label books are interesting, because they are ones where you go, it's not like a regular comic, but we maybe support that for 6 issues, which is cool. I think I love the fact that DC is doing some stuff that's not quite so, slam dunk and obvious, obvious in terms of the retail sales.
Yeah. Well, Ron, I really appreciate you coming on. I mean, this has just been a real treat for me, and I think our listeners will enjoy it too. I mean, you have written so many different comic books and a lot of my favorites, and it's always a joy whenever I get to see you at Baltimore and get something signed. My brother's a big fan as well. My brother Bobby, who goes to Baltimore with me, he's the Cryptid Creator Corner's #1 most dedicated fan. I say that every episode because Bobby listens to every episode, but he's a big fan of your Silver Surfer, and I think there was a Star Wars one. You did Darth Maul, right? It had to be your Darth Maul.
Yeah, I did Darth
Bobby's
Maul.
a big Darth Maul fan.
I did Darth Maul versus Darth Vader and Star Wars Tales.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been, like I said, I got to play with a lot of the toys in the toy box, and I'm forever grateful.
Is there you said Star Trek. I wanted to ask, because I'm a big Star Trek fan. I mean, The Next Generation was like huge for me, and is there a Star Trek character though? If you got to tell a story about anybody in any Star Trek?
For me, it's original series, because that's what I grew up with. Every weeknight, Channel 11 out of New York City, 6:00, Star Trek was on. And that's what, you come in from playing outside and have dinner and then watch Star Trek. It was the ritual. And it went that way for years, and I would watch those episodes over and over and over, so that, that completely, that stuff is completely ingrained in me. So I like most of the other Star Trek series. It's a world that I really enjoy. But to me, the stuff that I think the stuff you grow up with is always the stuff that means the most. So for me, it's original series, and it's Kirk, Bones, and Spock. Like that's the holy trinity of that franchise.
Yeah.
So someday I want to, even if it's a 10-page story, that's one of the things that's so cool about this business and doing this as a living, is you get to have those touchstones that meant something, that meant a lot to you as a kid. For me, Star Wars, Conan, Star Trek, those are to a great extent why I do what I do. I have, for the most part, never had a real job in my life. So, but you are the, you're the sort of the sum of your influences, and to get a chance to play with those influences and add to that tapestry a little bit is really cool.
Well, that's awesome, Ron. Again, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. This has been fantastic. I'm going to put links in the show notes to your website and so people can find you on social media. And I'm going to track down Samurai Heaven and Earth, and I'll put a link to that Amalgam book too, because I think folks are really going to like that, because I know a lot of in the circle that I'm on in social media and comics, there's always talk of those Amalgam comics. So, and anything else you have coming out, would always love to have you on to talk about whatever it is you're working on, Ron. Thanks.
Sounds good. We'll
I
do
really
it again,
appreciate
Jimmy.
it.
My
All right.
pleasure. I appreciate everything.
Listeners, let me know what it is you're reading, especially if you check out any of Ron's comics. Let me know what it is you like, what you've read. Yeah, I appreciate you listening. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.